Hi, I'm Reed, welcome to Crowland Publishing, and for Folklore Thursday, I do folklore-related videos, where I take history, folklore, myth, custom, religion, and I steal ideas for them for a TTRPG. And today we're going to do Narco Saints. Now, Narco Saints are folk saints, that is, a saint who is worshipped or revered by a cultural community regardless of if it is Catholic canon or not. Narco Saints are specifically tied to Mexican and South American drug and crime gangs. Now, a bit of culture about how all this is going to work. The Catholic Church spreads out all over the world, and part of the way that it does this is that it adapts to local history, folklore, myths, and customs. It adapts to the conditions that exist where the missionaries meet it. And a big part of how they did that was that they would identify local gods, local customs with Christian belief, so that if you've got a Lord of Darkness, they say, okay, well, that's not the Lord of Darkness, that's the devil. If they say, oh, you've got a sun god, well, that's obviously Jesus Christ. You were calling him the wrong name all this time. Now, change, or he'll stab you in the face for 1,000,000 years. And this is called syncretism. Happens all the time, all over the world, to every religion, and especially where there's trade and especially where there's conquest, where ideas mix, which happens all the time. The gods adapt. Now, of course, this is a bit of a potted history. This is a video about D&D. But roughly, in about the 1500s, into South and Central America come the conquistadors, a group of Spanish explorers and conquerors looking for new markets, new gold, new land, new colonies. And they run into the Aztecs, who are a native empire to the region. And by our standards, they have a fairly macabre culture and a fairly macabre group of deities. You get people like Chipe Totec, our god, the flayed one, worshipped by flaying bodies. You get the goddess of sluts and filth. Their devil figure, Smoking Mirror, is also called We Are His Slaves. He's also called Everyone's Enemies. Now, these represent cultural concerns to the Aztecs, just as the Virgin Mary was a powerful figure dealing with European cultural concerns. But virginity and motherhood just didn't have the same cultural cachet. Not to the Aztecs. But death did. And so the skeletal death goddess, Mitcaquehuatl, is reimagined as Santa Muerte, the fearsome holy death. Now, she's actually around in the culture for about 300 or 400 years. She's never a mainstream figure. She's really quite distant, really quite underground. But in the early 17th century, at least, we see that the Inquisition are discouraging her worship. But then around 1900, a guy by the name of Jose Guadalupe Posada draws on that forgotten imagery. Now, Posada, he's a bit of a commie, he's a bit of a Marxist, and so he draws on death as a symbol that it happens to rich and it happens to poor alike. It's literally the great leveler. And he is most famous now for creating Katrina, who is a popular political cartoon, and Katrina is sort of a secular Santa Muerte, a symbol of death, and death comes for us all. And his work is built on and built on until it becomes what we would now call the Day of the Dead aesthetic. And that's syncretism again. You just can't police culture. Image of Katrina up on the screen, by the way, if you want to look. So that's the 1900s. Now, drug wars and violence and poverty, they grow in the 20th century. And there's more and more death and there's more and more disenfranchisement. And suddenly, a death goddess, a goddess who takes us when we die and who looks after our dead, becomes more and more important. So Santa Muerte becomes kind of a grim reaper, a kind of angel of death. And if you're a criminal, if you're close to death or imprisonment or torture, and you're living a life that is obviously sinful, you want to have a goddess who looks after people like you. Now, this is important. The Narco Saints, who we're going to talk about, they do not judge us. They care for even the outcasts in our society. And you might want to think about that for any gods of evil that exist in your game. These are the gods who forgive the unforgivable. These are the gods of the marginalized and the oppressed and the outcast. Also the gods of bastards, though, you know. Now, at the same time as this is all going on, post-World War II, the West taste for drugs increase. So suddenly you get the narcos, the drug gangs, and these profits are so huge and the risks are so equally huge that you tend to get some very, very ruthless people indeed. And these ruthless people want ruthless gods. So there's Holy Death. She's waiting. But there are other narco saints. Now, probably the best known of these is Jesus Malverde, Jesus Evil Green. He's up on screen now, you can check him out, handsome fellow with the moustache. 1870s, Mexico is in a time of enormous social unrest and progress, and in the state of Sinaloa, a poor local kid goes bandit. Now, there's a lot of stories competing here, but basically, the kid is dared by a politician to go and steal the governor's sword, which he does, but this has a lot of blowback and embarrasses the politician who then hunts down this young boy criminal. And the boy criminal is betrayed and killed by his friends, or he's murdered by cops, something happens. And he probably never existed. There's a lot of colourful criminals that are running around at this time with guys with names like Thunderbolt. But like Ned Kelly or Robin Hood, they become these anti-authoritarian folk heroes. But because of the culture that exists in Mexico at the time, whoever he is becomes Jesus Malverde. And like Caesar or the Yellow Emperor, slowly but surely he builds up a religious following. Now this is really interesting. Right now, like as in August 2020, this is happening again. 2014, a guy by the name of Nazario Gonzalez was killed in a shootout with the army. And he was a drug baron, and they are building shrines to him right now. There is a new god in the world. And there are others like Juan Soldado, John Soldier, the patron saint of being wrongfully accused and wrongfully imprisoned and being framed. And then there's real saints who are important to the narco culture. Saint Judah becomes Saint Judas, the patron saint of lost causes. San Ramon is martyred through having his lips sewed or padlocked shut, so he becomes the patron saint of not talking to the cops. And of course these saints are worshipped like nearly any other saint. They are revered, you offer candles to them, you offer up sacrifices, you offer up wine, and in this particular case, you are specifically looking to have them aspected towards death and failure and suffering, so you are worshipping them with guns, with bullets, with bones, with skulls, with black candles. They're intentionally meant to be macabre and gothic and eerie. And that is basically Narco Saints. Saints specific to crime and saints specific to murder, and saints who forgive the criminal. So let's talk about adventure ideas. I think in games like Shadowrun or Anomaly or Dresden Files, these would just be regular supernatural creatures, regular religious figures. You would treat them as you would any other supernatural character or figure, maybe with a little bit of cultural sensitivity. But I think that it's more interesting to talk about bringing characters like this and bringing ideas and religions like this into fantasy and into D&D. So we're going to do that. Number 1. These are the gods of the Thieves Guild. Whatever the narco saints are in your world, there's always going to be saints of thieves and criminals. So an inquisitor or a paladin of good is looking to wipe out all the shrines to the narco saints in your city. And if you're any kind of adventurer or any kind of criminal or rogue, you're going to want to keep these gods happy. So you're going to have to deal with a purge with dogs coming down sewers, trained and maybe even enslaved werewolves, forged clerics in full armor declaring war on you and all your criminal scum pals. So the adventure is keeping a shrine safe, keeping them hidden, dealing with these teams of bloody cops, and then payback. You're criminals, you don't lay down. Number 2, someone powerful and influential in the criminal underworld dies. And if you and your party move quickly, and I mean that you should try and really keep the pressure on as a DM to make this happen very, very fast, but if your players can arrange big feasts, prayer circles, spreading the word, making miracles happen in the name of this underworld figure, you can turn this person into a demigod. But the gods of good and the rival criminal gods are going to be stopping you. But I think that you could have a really fun romp. You've got a week to get this done, make it all happen, and then if it works out, if the players win, they have a local demigod who owes them a favour. Number 3, another Thieves Guild related idea. A new coven or a cult comes to town. They're petty thieves, that's how they worship, no big deal. They pay the dues, they don't really cause any friction or hassle with your PC's Thieves Guild. But it becomes very clear slowly that the god of the saint that they worship is in fact the misunderstanding of an older, much more powerful and much darker entity. And while they think that they're just offering up blood and coins to a strange little jester god, in fact, something far, far worse has come to town, and it's getting more powerful. Number 4. In D&D, you're always going to have a lot of characters who are rogues, who are picaroons, who are, who operate on the edges of the law, who are not necessarily bad guys, but are certainly not really law-abiding goodies either. And I think that a way that you can really make the distinction between, in D&D terms, neutral and evil stand out is having your chaotic neutral rogues who worship gods of drugs and worship gods of criminality versus gods of evil, and a much darker kind of narco saint comes to town, a saint of torture, a saint of murder, a saint of serial killers, and his cult begins to operate. And so it's up to you and to your players to say, look, we're bad, but we're not evil. And you can get like a pretty fun, if grotesque, Hannibal-esque crime adventure out of that. Number 5 is my fave. So you're doing regular Thieves Guild campaign, and you're doing regular Thieves Guild stuff. You're robbing, you're seeing off rival crews, you're helping out allies, you're dealing with cops, you're laundering wealth, you're taking over regular business. But it soon becomes clear that your little Narco Saint god, your little god of thieves, is in fact the god of the redistribution of wealth. This god wants the means of production in the hands not of princes of barons, but of common people, of working people, scumbags like you. And this god has no problem using murder and treachery and darkness as their tools to have this cultural revolution. So that's it. Narco Saints. Pretty interesting. You should read more. It's fantastic, beautiful imagery. I'm Reed. This is Crowland Publishing. Why don't you give me a like, give me a share, and a subscribe. Vaya con Dios. Bye now.